feel like you are untangling shame over and over again? Hey there, I'm Danielle Zapchenk, and I am so thankful that you are joining me today on the Parable Podcast. Just a warning, if you have little ears around, we are using some adult words today, and I just wanted you to know because you probably don't want to give a vocab lesson later today. You are welcome. Please meet my guest, Growth Track Director Kylie Chrismond. She shares about how she needed to strip away the shame in her own life.
When the Lord has prompted me to share, I have never been the only woman in the room struggling with my addiction. Whether there were 8 women in the room or 80 or 800, I have never been the only one.
Here's my conversation with Kylie Chrismond. I am thrilled to introduce you to Kylie Chrismond. Kylie, we have been connected through a mutual friend, so it is always a treat for me to get to know new people. That's secretly why I have a podcast.
I love it.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So Kylie, I was recently at this pizza restaurant and they had cards on the table of like, just kind of get to know you conversations, which I think is genius. So of course I laid them all out on the table and took a bunch of pictures. So these are my top 3 that you get access to. If you could work for anyone as an assistant for 1 year, who would that be?
Wow.
And why?
I love this question. The first person that comes to mind is a woman who, she's a pastor, Megan Fate Marshman.
Yeah.
She's just so cool. She's a boy mom, dynamic teacher. Yeah. She just loves to have fun. She seems humble. I'm like, let me follow you around and just learn.
Yeah.
What a fun question.
Yeah. Well, mine was, there's the show on Netflix called Everybody Feed Phil. It's Phil Rosenthal. He was the creator of Everybody Loves Raymond, but he is just like joy on screen and he gets to travel and eat food and talk to people. And I'm like, that sounds like a great job.
Yes.
So yeah, I have plenty of people I could pick from.
I know. I have, now that you say that, I'm like, kind of want to pick somebody who travels the world and needs me to travel with them.
Yeah. Would you say you are mentally or physically stronger?
Mentally.
Yeah. Okay.
Without a doubt. I literally just started working out again in the last month for the first time since I had our 3rd son.
Okay.
So that was 2018. So you want to talk about physically strong? Not at all. I am getting back in there, but mentally I have stayed sharp, I guess, chasing around 4 boys and just juggling changes in life. And I've had to stay mentally sharp. So for sure, my mind is sharper, but hopefully here in the next year, I catch my body up.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
I think the same. I do take an aqua class, aqua aerobics.
Oh, yes.
Most of the folks are above 65, so I feel real young. I mean, I still remember the days we had to do chin-ups in gym where you pull yourself up. I don't think I could do one. And I felt like I was always going to pee my pants.
Yes. And the presidential fitness. When you had to run them, that's probably the last time I ran a mile.
Yeah.
That's what.
Me too.
Yeah. That's my level of fitness.
Kylie, what would you say is something that you are really passionate about?
I'm really passionate about creating a space where people can encounter a relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. So whatever it is that has been a roadblock for someone, whether that's church hurt or people or an addiction or just feeling like you're the only person struggling with something. I just love creating a space where people can be authentic, say the real, raw things, and encounter Jesus.
Day to day, what do you normally do? You said you're a mom of 4 boys, so I'm sure it's very quiet. What does your day look like?
This is the quietest my day has been. Yeah. So we get up, get 4 boys out the door for school. They're all in school for the first time in a decade all together. So we don't even know what to do with ourselves during the day. Yeah. So it's school. And then I'm on staff at a church here in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And loving it. I serve as their growth track director. And so just moving people through their growth steps, their journey with Christ. And then it's picking up kids and dinner and juggling all the nighttime activities. We just finished 2 months of our growth track. So I was at the church for our courses 3 nights a week. And that was a blast. We got to see over 800 adults growing intentionally, which was just really beautiful to see what the Lord did there. And then come home and the chaos of bedtime. Yeah, it's loud and it's a lot, but there's a lot of joy. And 4 boys it's a lot of fun. I love being a boy mom.
Kind of makes you feel like you're the special girl.
I am the special girl. Like, for sure. We don't have a dog. There's no girl dog here. There's no it's just, yeah.
I always think, we have a girl and a boy. And so it is similar how we parent, but there's definitely some differences. And I think of how we are raising our son, what we want him to know, how we are, we want him to be masculine, but also have emotions. Yeah, it's like a weird balance and learning. But as he grows, you see those pieces of him. And I'm excited to see where he goes and what he does. Is there something that you're noticing as you parent boys? You're like, I really want to invest this specifically in them.
They're all so different. So that is challenging. I thought we had it figured out with our first, and then our second came along and I realized I know nothing. It's so humbling. We have a couple very strong-willed boys. And so I just keep praying that the Lord would use their stubbornness and their strength for his glory. We talk a lot in our home that in this family, we push back the darkness and we usher in the kingdom of light. And so when there are inevitably fights in my home and disagreements, we talk a lot about kindness, that the words we use would be kind and encouraging, and that they would also usher in the kingdom of light. And you can see that my older two, they're really starting to understand that, especially that there's spiritual warfare around us. There's more happening than just what my eye can see, and talking about who they want to be and who they are. And in this family, they are warriors for the kingdom. And I'm like, Lord, use their strength and their stubbornness for your glory.
Absolutely. Well, Kylie, this podcast is about stories. I was just with a group of women the other day and just reminding them that their story matters. And ultimately, when I hear a story, it helps me build empathy and understanding, and maybe even connect with a piece of my own story where it helps me better understand how God is working in my life. So, Kylie, I would love to hear one of your parable stories today.
There's so many. And I've asked the Lord, what do you want me to share? We're in a season where I am untangling shame. And I thought I had shame figured out. That probably sounds silly to people listening, but I really did think that I had this figured out because I had struggled with an addiction to pornography and masturbation from the time that I was 17 until I was 30, and I struggled alone. This was over a decade of my life trying to understand it, trying to find freedom. I was a pastor's wife this whole time, became a mom. And, and so at each stage, I thought when I get married, when I have kids, then I will be free. And freedom never came. Finally, with our fourth son, I was just so tired. And I thought, oh my goodness, Lord, you have given me 4 boys. You are wild. Why would you do that? Also, just knowing the struggle that I have and times that I had pleaded with the Lord to take this from me. And yet there were so many things in my life that I was unwilling to change. And that year, I became really convicted about being in the Word daily. That immediately made the biggest difference. And then evaluating what I was consuming. So I'm watching, all of these shows that are filling my mind with things, and it's either leading me towards righteousness or it is feeding my flesh. So I'm learning this in real time, and just so much shame, right? For so long, especially because I had attended an evangelical university. I had sat in convocation with 10,000 students. I would hear messages directed at men regarding this issue, but never for women. And so the enemy kept telling me, you are the only one. If anyone else was struggling, someone else would be talking about this. Yeah. And there wasn't anyone else talking about this. So I just kept quiet for a really long time. But finally in 2019, I was just like, all right, Lord, let's try something different. So got in the Word, evaluated what I consumed. I started changing the things I was watching, listening to, and reading. And then I began doing some really hard work of like, what led me to this path in the first place? So I was doing active recovery work. Yeah. And then about 9 months into that, decided that I would start a recovery group for other women. I didn't really mean to be leading it. I just was the only person that I knew of struggling with it. And then I met one woman, and then I shared my story from stage, thought I was going to die. And then had a line of women waiting to talk with me and pray with me after I shared my story. It was really beautiful. But through this whole process, the Lord really began just like stripping away shame. And I stood on Romans 8:1. There is now therefore no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. And so I just shared freely. So then fast forward to this season, and here I am 5 years free and sober, praise God. And we moved from our church in Indiana to this church in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, which we didn't see coming. Definitely felt the Lord leading. I didn't necessarily want to move. I'm from Indiana. My family's there. I loved our life, but sensed that God was bringing us into a new season. And so we were going to be obedient. And so we got here and we arrived, and I was like ready to go, and just felt this crippling anxiety again, just crushing my chest. Man, this is familiar, but like, why? Yeah. I've already worked through. So what could I be feeling in this moment? So just through a series of conversations, just really casually at the table one day, the new staff was talking, and my pastor was just sharing about a time in his life when he had felt like he took on a lot of arrows and was just breaking those off, and kept going, not addressing the wound. And the Lord just really kindly invited him to pause and to rest and to address the wounds that he had taken on. And I just started crying. Like, everybody's eating tacos at this table. It's lunchtime. Like, this is not a serious conversation, really. And like, tears are just streaming down my face. And he was like, oh my goodness, like, this is really resonating with you. Like, are you okay? And I was like, apparently not. Like, I am not okay. And I didn't know that I wasn't okay. So then I ended up connecting with a spiritual director who, I just like word vomited all of this back to him. And he said, wow, it sounds like you're struggling with a lot of shame. And I said, I don't think so. No. Like, let me tell you a little bit about my story, recapped my addiction with him. Oh, I've shared freely from stay. I've done this and done that. And I just share boldly, and I don't feel shame about my story. And so I don't think it's shame. And he said so kindly, he was like, well, just because you have put your thumb on shame in one area of your life does not mean that it is not all tangled up in other areas. And it sounds like you're really struggling with it in just like who you are. And I was like, ugh. I don't like that at all. Yeah. And so we kind of started doing this work, and sure enough, I mean, the Lord just opened my eyes to all of this shame that I had about who I am. Now I'm here in this new place, on staff at a new church, in this new role, new community, new this, and I'm just unsure as to whether or not I'm going to meet people's expectations. I just feel like I'm going to be a constant disappointment. Like, I'm going to show up and they're going to say, oh, we wish that she was more. We wish that we wish she was like this or less like that. And it was crippling. I was paralyzed. And so in the Lord's kindness, he reminded me, there's a story in Mark 5, when Jesus delivers the demoniac begs to go with Jesus after he's been healed. And in my mind, I thought, yeah, why not? Because this man is the perfect disciple. He's been radically transformed. Let him go with Jesus and learn. And Jesus says, no, you stay and you go and tell what I've done for you. Like, you have everything you need. And just a big exhale. Like, oh, Lord, how quickly I forgot this lesson that you taught me a few years ago. And now here I am again in need of the same lesson, that I have everything I need. The Holy Spirit is in me. I am a vessel, imperfect, and that's okay. But I put all this pressure on myself to show up and be perfect. And that is never what he was asking of me. He's just asking for this willing participant in his story. Pressure is off. And so I've just spent the last few months like untangling that again, which in a way felt discouraging to be back at what felt like the beginning, learning something that I thought I had already learned. But the Lord really is like transforming really broken pieces of my heart. And I do feel very set free in this season. To just be who I am and to authentically show up, whether I know you or I don't know you, and just to allow the Lord to move the way that he wants to move.
Kylie, thank you for, first of all, this is the first time that a woman has shared about this on the podcast. And so I appreciate that. And I think just by what you were saying with the women that were coming forward, it's evident that any sin is always there, but is what you're talking about. It's like the sense of like, I'm the only one that's dealing with it. And that just like spirals us down even closer into shame.
Yes.
I got a bunch of questions from this. One, you talked about addressing the wound. And when this first started, pornography addiction and masturbation, was there something that triggered that within you that you can look back and you're like, okay, this started within me?
So when I was 17, my parents started having problems in their marriage. And prior to that, they had led life groups and they had counseled other couples through their marriage crises. Like they would go and sit on other people's couches and help them. So when the instability first started showing in our home, I really didn't have a framework for how to deal with that. So I just started escaping. I've always had a boyfriend. So I would just throw myself at just trying to find love and affirmation and comfort anywhere else. I just didn't want to be home. And then that escalated because sin's appetite is never satiated. And so the relationships with, a boyfriend, that was never enough. And so I ended up stumbling upon pornography. And then once that happened, it was like such a quick addiction, as addictive as heroin. The same areas of your brain light up. The science is, it's really, really compelling just how dangerous this is. It's not a casual activity. And so I stumbled into this and then would go in seasons, just for a little bit thinking that I had overcome it, but never really addressing that wound that I had felt abandoned. I felt like my needs weren't important anymore. I felt like I needed to make myself smaller, and I was feeling all of this anxiety. I didn't know what to call it when I was 17, 18 years old. I didn't have anybody to talk to about this. I was really just stuffing everything down. And when we do not deal with all of the things that are bubbling under the surface, you can insert whatever vice of your choosing. It really is just our inability or our refusal to deal with the thoughts and the feelings that are bubbling up inside of us that we don't know what to do with. And then we cope in ways that our brain says, well, this makes us feel good. And this is a temporary relief. And we can't stand this anxiety so long. And so we escape, and that feels good. And then we feel shame, and that actually fuels the cycle. And so we just keep spiraling, keep going further and further. And then we train our brains that the only way to experience relief, because we've worn a pathway, like if you imagine, walking a path through your yard and you walk the same path over and over and over, and there's a reward at the end of that path, that there's always a little dopamine hit. And so you're going to just keep walking it. And now there's no grass and it's completely worn, and your brain's never going to walk the other path because that's harder and there's other stuff to clear. Forget that. We've already worn this path. And so I just kept walking the path that I had worn down in my brain that when I was stressed or lonely or feeling abandoned or sad or overwhelmed or anxious, insert any negative feeling, my brain said, oh, well, we know how to find relief. Like, we know what brings relief. And at the end of that path was always the same. So I had to retrain my brain, new pathways. And it is possible.
Yeah, it is possible. You had said that, your job is to help people on this growth track, and you appreciate the messy. And I mean, that's really, if we look at all of our lives, we're all a bit of a mess. And so how would you say when you felt encouraged, like you're moving forward, it is going in a good direction, but something happens, something triggers, and you get a setback, like you said, the path that you can eventually go down. And so if you have a setback, what would be your encouragement to somebody? Because it feels like, I obviously I can't do it. So I just keep getting set back.
It is like exercising a muscle. And so just because we have this one setback, like keep going on the path, on the new pathway that you're trying to forge. You can think of it as like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you're still moving forward. You can think of it like, oh, I'm climbing this mountain and I just slid a little bit backwards. Keep going. You are not all the way down at the bottom again. No, you have come so far. You've learned so much. Keep going. And I just found it really compelling to say, I desire to be this way. I don't desire to live this way anymore. And if that's true about my life, then I'm going to turn and I'm going to walk this other path. It also helps to have community. That's like a whole other, that's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Community was such a huge part of my recovery process. And I didn't even know how important it was. But for somebody who kind of stumbles backwards, I would just say, who do you want to be? And just keep going and bring community into it, because you need other people cheering you on.
Yeah. I think the community aspect is like, it's the scariest part, because you had talked about, you're like, will I be unqualified? What will people think of me? And then again, it just like creates this instant cycle. I noticed a lot of what you shared. It's a lot of self-talk. And so I'd be interested to know, was all of that self-talk, was it built up so much in your mind that when you actually shared it, people were like, oh, okay. Was it received the same way you thought it would be received?
Yes and no. Usually people say, wow, I've never heard another woman share that.
Yeah.
And then they go on to share whatever thing they're struggling with, whether it's drugs and smoking and alcohol, or, you insert the thing. So usually somebody would just go on to share their own story. So they're like, wow, that's really brave of you. I've never heard anybody share that, but let me share with you, so then they're going to go on. So it was never as scary. I'll tell you this, Danielle, I've never been rejected in a room. And I want to be careful to say, because I've encouraged people to like share their story, and I'm not saying that we just share it in every room and like, that we use discernment when we share it. But when the Lord has prompted me to share, I have never been the only woman in the room struggling with my addiction. Whether there were 8 women in the room or 80 or 800, I have never been the only one. Yeah, I'm just like, the Lord's bringing back to mind so many times where someone would come up to me so unexpectedly. Like I would just think, oh, I would never think her. Women in their 60s or 70s who have lost a spouse, who ended up down a path that they're like, oh, I was so confused. I've never heard anybody share about this. And they're thinking they're the only one. They're not.
Okay. You had mentioned that there were certain shows, and it could be pretty much anything. You could go with books. I was reading a book the other day and I was like, okay, this is a little bit more than I thought this book would be. A little too spicy. Now, everyone's different. And so there was a podcast that I was listening to, and I want to embrace sexuality, but also at the same time, how do we protect ourselves? And so everyone's tolerance level, if you will, is different. I think that is also seasonal. And sometimes you just don't know. If you're like watching a show on Netflix, you're like, oh, was not expecting that. So how would you help someone kind of decide to evaluate what they're consuming?
Is this like one of my favorite things to talk about, but it also is like such a hot button. Like I can easily offend people probably, because you're so right, Danielle. It really is a discernment issue between you and the Lord. And so everybody's tolerance is going to be different. And yet I want to say there are some things that are just like obviously unrighteous. And I believe that you cannot justify how this honors God or how this is making you more Christ-like. I try to not be, I don't want to be really extreme, but I'll just use my example. So I always watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, like all the time. It was one of my go-tos. Like I would text my sisters. It was so fun. It's like, you know, kind of a community thing. You like watch it with other people and it was really fun. So that show and then like Grey's Anatomy, I mean, it was basically just like ABC, I guess, because Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, like all of these shows. And as I sat down and I started listing out, who do I want to be? Yeah. And what do I want to be true of my life 1 year from now? Well, I wanted to be more Christ-like. I wanted to be in the Word, but that meant I needed to get up early before my boys did, which means I needed to go to bed earlier, which means I didn't really have time for these shows. And these shows were fueling something in me. I'm not saying that I would watch them and then want to go look at pornography, but they certainly were not fueling righteousness, a desire for righteousness. It's very toxic, chaos. Okay, so as I set those shows aside, it became easier to be in the Word. It became easier to be self-disciplined. It became easier to just, let's see, I needed to edit my social media. I had to unfollow a lot of like pop culture, right? Because it just wasn't serving me well for where I wanted to go. It was as simple as that. It wasn't serving me well for where I wanted to go. And so I just encouraged people to evaluate. I had a woman come up to me at a conference and she said, I really love my husband. Like, love him. He is so great. He is so handsome. He takes care of us. He provides for us, all these things. But I sometimes have dreams about other men who are not my husband and they are not righteous. And I said, when do those dreams happen? Or like, what, like, tell me more. And she's like, well, sometimes, usually they happen after I've never seen Yellowstone. I've never seen it. I don't know.
It's a dark show. It's really,
I have no idea. And so after she watches this show, she has dreams about other men. And I just encouraged her. I said, lean into that, lay that before the Lord, ask him if this is leading you to righteousness or if this is leading you towards a path of unrighteousness. It's just really as simple as that. It's not hard. Sometimes it is annoying. It was annoying for me to give up, you know, The Bachelor and Bachelorette and my text thread with my sisters. And they were so supportive. You know, I told them and they were like, oh, yeah, we totally understand. Like, that makes sense for your recovery journey. And it didn't mean that they needed to stop watching it. But for me, I needed to. There are shows that I feel like, oh, what are we doing watching it? Like Bridgerton. You know, like saw an episode and I was like floored. And then we have parties and themes. And I'm like, wow, I am having a hard time getting past how we are justifying this, how this is leading us to a more Christ-like life. I don't, and so I'll just leave that there. And then people can email
I appreciate you sharing that because again, like I said, I think there is a different tolerance level. Like sometimes maybe I'm just like so numb to it. Even like violent shows. My husband came down one time, he came downstairs and he's like, what are you watching? And I'm just like, oh, whatever. Like I have like, no, it doesn't matter. But there are some things that are like super effective of my heart and my soul. And I feel I'm like, oh, I can't even watch the show anymore. It's just, it's too dark or it's just gross. I don't know. Yeah. I feel like that's a question where you have to ask that for yourself. It's a personal thought process between you and God. You have 4 boys and I just had to talk to my son the other day about what an orgasm was. Okay. And then he was like, I'm good, Mom. I'm good.
I know.
So how do you talk about, you know, as they're growing up, like they're figuring out their bodies and like, so like talking about masturbation, I don't know how to start that conversation with him.
So I'm still figuring this out and still trying to find really great resources. We started with like good pictures, bad pictures, which I had mixed feelings about anyway. But we read it and it was a great tool for conversation. It really gently introduced like, this is what pornography is. This is what it's called. And so we had this conversation. The conversation about pleasure and how God designed our bodies for pleasure is such a tricky one. I'll just be honest with you. I am not looking forward to this conversation with my boys. God made our bodies. He calls them good. Yeah. I don't want to teach my boys that the feelings that their feelings are bad. There's just an appropriate and an inappropriate time to experience this pleasure. And that the height of that is between a husband and a wife in marriage, and that God means for us to experience pleasure. It's how he designed our bodies. As far as masturbation, this is a really tricky subject because I probably lean more towards not indulging because in my experience, it was tied to pornography. Very rarely was that like a solo act. Although I do know, and I've had many conversations with women who have never looked at pornography, but they say, hey, I struggle with masturbation, but I've never looked at pornography. Walk me through that. I said, really simply, God designed sex between a man and a woman. We do not see an instance of solo sex being blessed. And one of the pastors that I follow, Steve Arterburn, says that solo sex is selfish sex. And that took a minute to sit with. I sat with it and I was like, okay, yeah, I see that, especially in marriage. If I'm taking that from my spouse, I really should be talking to my husband about my desire. And that's really between a husband and a wife, you know, the boundaries there. But it has to be open communication. We cannot be secretly doing these things behind our spouse's back. So if this is out in the open, and that's a separate conversation. But so then if we back it up, okay, so we're backing up. Now we're a teenager. If you just freely indulge and you lack self-control outside of marriage, you are going to have a hard time exercising self-control in your marriage. Yeah. Period. And so right now we're building muscles. Right now we are exercising self-discipline because we want to be self-disciplined in our marriage, to be faithful and self-controlled when I am married, because I thought that marriage would fix that for me and it didn't. And I was so discouraged when it didn't, but it was never about that. It was that I lacked self-control. I didn't know how to deny my flesh, how to reroute my desires. The desire is not a sin. What do I do with it on the other side of that? And how can I teach myself that God means for me to delay gratification? Sometimes I need to wait. And that is a good muscle to exercise. And so those conversations with teens, it's hard, but we need to learn self-discipline now. And it's going to make our marriages fuller and richer.
This is so good.
It's a tough one.
Thank you so much. And I don't assume that you need to know all the information.
And I don't. I would never.
I just appreciate you sharing your thoughts. You know, as we wrap, I would love for you to just talk to the woman who is listening, or the man who's listening, whatever thing that they're struggling with right now. They feel alone. They feel like they've piqued like a little bit of interest in maybe like sharing this with someone safe, but they're scared. And so what would be the words that you would share with them, Kylie?
I would encourage them to set up a time to tell that trusted person, whoever they have in mind, and to go ahead and tell them, hey, I want to talk to you about something hard. Preface the conversation so that you're accountable to having the hard conversation. And then share freely, knowing that if this really is a trusted and safe relationship, they will be grateful that you shared. My heart does break for the people who share and it was not the right person and they were not a safe place for them. And I would just encourage you to not let that stop you and to find someone, to find a support, a recovery group where people are very receptive to stories. Celebrate Recovery is a great place to start. If you're like, I don't know anyone, I don't know a single person who's safe, who I could share this with, find a local Celebrate Recovery group and share there, or a 12-step program for whatever addiction, and go and share with other people. Saying it out loud is so powerful. That pressure that you're feeling, the hold that it literally feels like a choke hold on you where you cannot speak about it. It begins to lose its power every single time you speak it out loud. Mm-hmm. Keep saying it out loud until it no longer has that choke hold on you. And so I just encourage you, find somewhere that you can say these words out loud in a safe community.
Kylie, I'm so grateful that I got connected with you. I'm thankful for this story and how God has continually been working in you and how he still will through other people and their stories. And if people wanted to get connected to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram. I check my DMs and I'll chat with you there. And so that's where we can connect easiest.
I will put all of Kylie's information in today's show notes. Kylie Chrismond, thank you so much for being on the Parable Podcast.
Thanks, Danielle. It's been a joy.
I was thrilled to have this conversation with Kylie today. I don't know where our guest is going to go with their parable story. And so I really hope that this was thought-provoking for you. It made you think and reassess certain things. And I just appreciate Kylie for going first. If you want to reach out to Kylie, simply visit daniellezapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Kylie. Number 1, is it time to reevaluate what you are consuming? Maybe that is TV or certain types of books, relationships even, anything that is not righteous for you. Number 2, is there something you can delay gratification to this week? Maybe to benefit your own self-control. And just an easy example of this, for the month of January, our family doesn't buy anything that we don't need. No purchases are allowed on Amazon. We do not go to restaurants or fast food. To them, it is the end of the world. But we did it for the first time last year and it was great. So is there something you can delay gratification this week? Let's give it up to our editor, my husband, Eric, who does an amazing job on the production of the Parable Podcast. Hey, I know you could spend your time doing so many things. So the fact that you took the time to spend it with me and with Kylie is appreciated. Remember, your parable showcases how God is with you even when things get tangled up. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.